to him who is able to keep me from falling, from falling. Now unto him who is able to keep me from falling, from falling. Unto you be all the glory and the honor and all majesty. You have all power and authority, and you proclaim that same power belongs to me. So I won't worry, I won't leave the way I came. I've been changed in your presence, and I'll never be the same. I receive the blessing. I receive the blessing. So I won't worry, I won't leave the way I came. I've been changed in your presence, and I'll never be the same. I receive the blessing. I receive the blessing. Your hand is upon me, said your grace covers me. Your blood has washed me. I'm yours totally. Your hand is upon me. Your grace covers me. Your blood has washed me. I'm yours totally. Your hand is upon me. Your grace covers me. Your blood has washed me. I'm yours totally. Your hand is upon me. Your grace covers me. Your blood has washed me. I'm yours totally. Your hand is upon me. Your grace covers me. Your blood has washed me. I won't worry, I won't leave the way I came. I've been changed in your presence, and I'll never be the same. I receive the blessing. I receive the
Morning. Generation X crossed the Red Sea with the sting of the whip still in their backs. Slept the soundest in the sand that first night. They most needed the rest. They had been up since sunup that morning, working, and still outran Pharaoh's chariots that evening. It was their mourning that would be turned to dancing, and they grand jeté past the Sphinx. They wrote the freedom songs. They lifted every voice to sing a melody their hearts had waited 400 years to write. Hashira la Adonai, for he hath triumphed gloriously. These had not prayed for milk and honey. They just wanted the shackles loosed from their feet. They sat by the pillar of fire and whispered, if the Lord never does anything else for me, he's already done enough. He's already kept his promise. But the thing is, deliverance is not the same as free. It's your mind that needs deliverance when all you know is slavery. Before true liberation, there must be healing and restoration. And so leaving Egypt starts the story of salvation. So began the process of making them ready for freedom. 4 decades. 4 decades changed a generation from X to Y, from fresh off the plantation to why should we even leave the desert? I like our new dictator. I mean, I'm still scared of the word master, so we send Moses up Moriah, but he wrote down what he said. Not much, just 10 commands, plus we've kind of gotten used to governing ourselves. We appointed one from each of the 12 tribes to solve our crimes, and once a quarter they meet up and make all the important decisions for us. And if the Lord never does anything else for us, it's only because he's already done enough. I mean, do we really need a promised land? I mean, are we really still talking about that? Look, my tent's been staked to the sand. Plus, I heard there were giants in the land. But Joshua was different. His generation was born in the sand, the final stage of evolution. They got tired of sending Moses up the mountain, got tired of listening for God in 2 stone tablets. They wanted a relationship of their own with the I Am, wanted to trust the words he had given to them. Let us go in and take the land. Surely the God of our bedtime stories will deliver it into our hands. I tire of sand. I'm ready to be free. I don't care how many giants I see. Why should freedom be for them and not for me? Why should privilege be for them and not for me? Why should safety be for them and not for our generation? Why should their children be raised on milk and honey while we chase after quail and hold our tongues out for manna? Why must we beg rocks for water when it flows freely from their springs? Say something. Some one of you who crossed the Red Sea, if we serve the God of Abraham, why should heaven be for them and not for we to whom freedom was promised since our ancestors left Egypt? I don't care if there are giants. Surely the God of your servants will bring down all these walls if we but march. Surely the God you have told me about will bring down all these walls if we but march, if we but start marching around these walls. Surely the same God who delivered us from Egypt would not condemn us to live behind these walls. Joshua's cry floated up Mount Moriah like incense. The Spirit provided interpretation. God inhaled his readiness and spoke to him instead of Moses. Look sharp now, he said. I have already given Jericho to you, its king and its troops. Here's what you must do. March. Bring the people and their instruments and march. Bring your soldiers and their worship and march. March for 7 days, and when you are tired, march 7 times and cry out. And the walls will come tumbling down.
Wow, wow, wow. Okay, I'm not sure. I'm used to just preaching straight from the paper, so all of the technological stuff, everybody else is gonna have to do. We have all the mics and everything together. Okay, so move this out. First of all, I want to say thank you to Keisha for that. Y'all give another round of applause. That was phenomenal. Phenomenal. And I almost didn't ask her to do it because I knew she would. And I know she's retired from poetry, but I knew she would do it for me. So thank you so much to Keisha, number one. I also want to thank the leaders of the church, Pastor Nixon and Pastor Whitaker. Just two awesome brothers. I've been so blessed to have them as my spiritual guide, and we as a Decatur church and a Decatur community are so blessed to have them as our spiritual leaders. I've gotten to know them personally and have had personal conversations with them, and both of them have always just blown my mind with their dialogue and with their intelligence and with their commitment to the people of God and commitment to the Word. And so I'm so blessed to know both Pastor Nixon and Pastor Whitaker. I also want to thank my family for being here. My auntie called me a couple of weeks ago, and we were just talking, and I said, "Oh, auntie, you know, they asked me to say a few words at Decatur." And I said, she said, "Oh, you're doing a poem?" I said, no, they asked me to preach. She said, "You always doing stuff all around the city, and you don't ever tell nobody. I need you to let the family know when you're doing something." So I had to let her know because she threatened she was going to call my mama, and my mama was going to come up here from Florida. So I had to let her know. She said, we gonna bring your cousin. You know, he just moved here to Sandy Springs from Cincinnati, and then we got another cousin, and then your other uncle, and we just going to bring them all to the church. Half these people I ain't seen since I was 7. But I say bring them on, right? It's all family, so we're going to bring them on out here. So I just want to thank my family for showing so much support, my family, my friends, my colleagues, my brother Clinton out there. So I just want to thank them. Special thanks to the veterans. I think we need to, again, give them another round of applause. All the veterans who have fought and served this country. So I definitely want to say a special thanks to them. And last but not least, thank Joshua Generation. And just to talk a little bit about Joshua Generation and what they've been doing. Joshua Generation has been a part of the back-to-school block parties here at Decatur. They have put on spiritual retreats for our young people, taking us to isolated places where we can become one with God through nature, right? So we can begin to understand who He is in that context. The community service initiatives headed by Ms. Sarah Grant has been phenomenal, where we have been able to connect with our sick and our shut-in. And we've been able to connect with them and continue to worship with them, even though they cannot be here with us collectively. The Spirit-Filled Bible Studies by Danielle Campbell have just been riveting, and the way she just breaks open the Word of God and presents it to us, not in a preachy, teachy kind of way, but asking us questions and evoking thought and causing us to critically think and really understand what it is that God has for us in His Word. Last but not least, a lot of the great marketing coming from Rashad and Scott, and actually just the whole team of all of the Neela Hines, President Neela Hines, and the Hines administration. If they could stand. If you're here, I know they're kind of around working. So we got Rashad over here, Danielle. If you all can stand up. The Hines administration has just been working tirelessly. And I think a lot of times some of our bigger goals in the church, some of our smaller ministries, sometimes can get overlooked unconsciously, and so we just want to say thank you to you all for everything you've done. And I remember when Joshua Generation first got started, and I remember it was you said about 5 years ago, I think somebody said, about 5 years ago. 5 years ago, Shayla Shorter, if you're in the building, can you stand? Is Dr. Shayla Shorter? There you go. Dr. Shayla Shorter, she's actually the founder of Joshua Generation. It was because of her that we are having this day today. And I remember when she came to me and said, "Hey, I feel like there's a missing piece in church. I feel like our young adults, there really isn't anything for that 18 to 35 range. A lot of times people see you as a young person, as a kid, but you got bills like an adult, right? And so Sally Mae calling us just like they calling the adults, right? And so we're trying to kind of navigate our way within this kind of Christian framework. And so she saw a need, and her and Amber K. Boyd and we all met. I think Jared was there as well, and we just kind of met. And through her leadership and her vision, Joshua Generation was started. And so I want to say thank you to Shayla Shorter, the first president of Joshua Generation, Amber K. Boyd, Sosina Sanders, and now President Neela Hines. And if you notice, they all sisters. So the sisters is rolling. They rolling, and brothers, we got to catch up. We got to roll with them, because it has been an honor and a privilege to serve under these Joshua Generation presidents. And typically, when we talk about the Joshua Generation, people refer to the younger generation, the young, vibrant leaders who are put in place to lead the nation and lead the community and the people to a new age. Usually these young people are characterized as anti-establishment, right? Rebellious, brave enough to go against the traditions of the past and to go against the grain. But after doing a bit more research about this whole concept of Joshua Generation, I found out that it's not necessarily about a group of people. It's not necessarily about an age cohort, but Joshua Generation is actually a process. It's a process. So we're going to break this thing down. Joshua, the term Joshua actually means Yahweh saves, right? That's what the name Joshua means. And generation is the art of producing a people or the art of producing offspring. So one can define Joshua Generation or the generation of Joshua to mean the art of producing a people that God saves, right? So Joshua Generation is not necessarily something that we are a part of or something that you're born into, but it's really something that you do. And what we see when we look in the book of Joshua, what we see is really just the final step in the whole process. But the Joshua Generation process, or the art of producing a people that God saves, it actually starts generations before Joshua was even born. All right? And so today what we're going to do is we're going to examine this Joshua Generation process, and we're going to look at how each book of the Bible, not all 66, just up to Joshua, how Joshua led the people to salvation, walking through this salvation process and allowing this exploration. Hopefully it will expose us to the process, help us understand the process, and then be able to recreate this process in the present day. So that's what we're going to do in the next few minutes. And we're going to go on this journey under the title, The Art of Salvation. The Art of Salvation. Shall we pray? God, you told me to just prepare, just to get ready, and you would take care of everything else, God. So open the minds and the hearts of your people, Lord. Open everybody who is here under the sound of my voice, everybody who is watching over the internet waves, God. And we ask that the words that you have for us, Lord, let it change our minds, let it change our hearts, and ultimately change our actions and the way we view and we see each other. In your holy name, amen. All right, so we're going to start with the book of Genesis right there. And when I was at Oakwood, I had a professor. Now, this was back in 2003, so it was a minute ago. And I had a professor. I can't remember the name of the class, but it was what every young freshman or new theological student had to take. It was a class that we had to take, and it was taught by Dr. Gregory Allen. And he would give a lecture called The Call, making sure that if you are going to sacrifice, right? If you're going to embark on this thing called ministry, you got to make sure you're called to this. This is nothing to play with, right? And so what we see right here in Genesis is that in understanding the Joshua Generation process, you have to understand that you are called to a unique group. You are called to salvation. You are set apart. You are elected into this nation, right? And so when we do our research, we see that Joshua came from a tribe called Ephraim. Now, Ephraim was the son of Joseph and an Egyptian woman by the name of Asenath, right? Now, not only was this a woman an Egyptian, but she was also the daughter of the high priest of the sun god. So she was a very important Egyptian woman, right? Probably some level of royalty. And this woman was given to Joseph, and eventually Joseph was given an Egyptian name. So for all intents and purposes, this made Joseph what seemed to be fully integrated into the Egyptian culture, right? He didn't know the Egyptians would eventually oppress his people. So to us, looking back on hindsight, it looked like Joseph sold out, right? By becoming a leader of Egypt, marrying an Egyptian woman, having some half Egyptian kids, right? Right? It looked like he sold out. But God used this moment to begin this notion of the Joshua generation, the art of producing a people that God saves. And Joseph starts this process through the naming of his children. See, he had 2 sons. And one of those sons he named Ephraim. Ephraim means God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. See, although Joseph was integrated in the Egyptian lifestyle, he made sure that through the naming of his children, the future of his family would know who the true God was. And not only the story of his deliverance, but hopefully understand their own deliverance. So Ephraim literally means that you are abundant and you are producing fruit in a land of misfortune. Now, this land of misfortune could be a society of injustice. It could be a community of poverty. Maybe you're producing fruit in a relationship of abuse, physical, mental, emotional, or some may be dealing with their social misfortunes or dealing with their land of misfortunes in a church of apathy. But whatever your situation, God has made you fruitful. God has allowed me to produce and bring forth fruit and to create life in a lifeless situation. And Jared, when I saw this, you know who I thought about? It's funny, I thought about Tupac Shakur. I know, it's me. You shouldn't have asked me. You just shouldn't have asked me then. I thought about Tupac Shakur. Now, Tupac, he wrote a poem called The Rose That Grew from Concrete, right? Tupac, for those who may not know, was a rapper. He was born to a sister by the name of Afeni Shakur, a former Black Panther. And she was in prison while she was pregnant with him, and some of the things that she taught him had to do with things related to the Black liberation movement, etc. Very, very intelligent brother growing up, went to the School of the Arts, but grew up in poverty. He then moved to California and became a part of the nascent, the budding hip-hop scene, right? And then from there, he began to rap about sometimes gold chains and rap about living a very lascivious lifestyle. But then on the other hand, there was a lot of his music that inspired people. And even though it was gritty and even though it was raw and at times offensive, he inspired a generation of young people who came out of a land of social misfortunes and out of situations of poverty and drug-infested communities and gang territories, and from their mouths encouraged them to create life in lifeless situations. And so there's a book that he wrote entitled The Rose That Grew from Concrete, and it's a very short piece. I'm gonna read it to you. It says, "Did you hear about the rose that grew from a crack in the concrete? Proving nature's law is wrong, it learned to walk without having feet. Funny it seems, but by keeping its dreams, it learned to breathe fresh air. Long live the rose that grew from concrete when no one else ever cared." So living inside of concrete was the land of misfortune that Tupac was painting for us through his words. Because if you think about it, what can be planted inside of concrete, right? Nothing. If you put something in concrete, it's gonna die. But what Pac is saying is that a rose came out of this, right? Something beautiful, something productive came out of concrete, came out of an element of misfortune. So then the question remains, well, what does this have to do with Joseph? Because Joseph wasn't in a land of misfortunes when he had Ephraim. He was rich. He had a royal wife. He had 2 healthy sons. He just saved his people from starvation. Where was his misfortunes? Ephraim was one of the 12 tribes of Israel that came out of the 400 years of Egypt's oppression over the Israelites. And Joshua was one of those great-great-great-great-grandchildren down the line that was born out of this tribe. So Joshua was born out of a tribe whose very name meant to be fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. So Joseph was not naming Ephraim for himself, but one could say that he was preparing his people for the misfortunes that would come. through the very naming of his tribe, he was sending a message to his grandsons, sending a message to his granddaughters that hard times is going to come. Misfortunes is going to come. It may not be here right now, but they will come in the future. And I know this because I've been there. My brother sold me off into slavery. I was in jail. I was looking at death right before my very eyes. But in your very name, I am preparing you for salvation of not only yourselves, but your entire people. By giving you this name, I am creating a generation of people that God will save. Even before he even knew it, Joseph was a part of this whole generation, Joshua generation process. He was preparing his people for what his offspring, Joshua, was getting ready to do. So the first step in the salvation process was to be called into God's promise and be elected as a nation, but then you have to receive that call. You got to receive that name. You have to understand that you are a son and or a daughter. You are a son or a daughter of God, and you have to first receive that, right? The next book, when we look at the book of Exodus, we see that here is where the people of Israel are now delivered out of bondage. And we know we're in bondage because we were all born in sin and shaped in what? Y'all been reading y'all Bible. We all go through bondage. You see, God can't save you if you ain't never been through that. Because then what's he saving you from? And how will you be able to appreciate salvation, right? So you got to go through something. You have to understand pain. You have to understand trials and tribulations. Now, before we get to Joshua, I want to stop at his father for a second. Now, Joshua had a father. His name was Nun, N-U-N. And Nun had spent almost his entire life in Egyptian captivity. So Nun couldn't do it. Nun couldn't be the one to lead his people because he didn't know what freedom really looked like. He didn't really know what liberation really looked like. You can't take somebody somewhere that you ain't never been. See, Joshua had been with Moses, and he had seen what God had done to and for him. He was a young man when God, through Moses, sent the plagues to punish Pharaoh, right? He witnessed Moses go to the face of the most powerful man in the land and demand that you let my people go. He was right there with Moses when Moses was at the Red Sea, and he's hearing the trampling of Pharaoh's feet and Pharaoh's army to the left, and he's seeing the rushing waters of the Red Sea on the right. And he was there with Moses when Moses raised his staff, and he parted the Red Sea and watched his people walk out of bondage towards a land of freedom. He was in bondage, but he was still young enough, not just in age, but in mindset, to really accept this idea of liberation. To accept the idea of salvation. Again, history says that his father Nun, has spent most of his life in bondage, and sometimes when we have experienced oppression for so long, when we have experienced heartache for so long, we tend to maintain a pessimistic position in the cause of freedom and opportunity. When you have been in a bondage, when you've been in bondage for so long, even when you see that freedom and salvation is possible, we become so used to bondage that we can't fully accept the idea of a promised land. Nun saw the same things that Joshua did. He was a part of the same lineage, the whole element of misfortune, all of that. He was a part of all of that. But maybe Nun could have been the one to do it, but he had been beaten down for so long. He was brave enough to leave bondage, but not young enough in mind or in body to fully embrace the idea of freedom. So Joshua knew what freedom looked like because he had walked with Moses. He had felt what Moses felt. He experienced what Moses experienced. He experienced God, and he saw God move in ways that his father couldn't quite comprehend. I'm gonna put this in a different context for you. Who is this? Everybody know who this is? Harriet Tubman, right? So most people know who Harriet Tubman is. She was an enslaved African who was used to bring thousands of enslaved people to freedom, but how would she know where to take them if she had never been there herself? If she had not first experienced freedom for herself and had gone to the north for herself, how would she have been able to devise a plan to bring her people there? Who's that? Dr. King, right? Dr. King was born and educated in the Jim Crow South. walked many of the same streets that we walk today. He was fortunate enough, however, to travel to Germany, and at the time he was Michael Luther King. His dad was Michael Luther King Sr. And when his dad learned about Martin Luther and how Martin Luther liberated his people from the oppression, the oppressive penances of the Catholic Church, he was inspired and changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr., changed his son's name to Martin Luther King Jr., right? And then eventually sent him out to Morehouse, right? Eventually sent him to Crozer Theological Seminary and Boston University, where he was taught freedom, right? Dr. King learned about freedom. He wrote about freedom. He studied methods of freedom, and then came back to the South where his people were segregated. He went back to those people, and he applied those same methods that he learned, right? But how was he able to do this? Because he had been in bondage himself. And while he was in bondage, he experienced freedom. Because he had seen freedom in bondage, he was able to take his people to a place that he had seen, that he had experienced, that he understood. It's the same way with us. We're not going to follow somebody who can't identify with our pain. I have a colleague, he calls it the monopoly of oppression sometimes that we have with each other. We go back and forth on who had it the worst. Right? What you know about being broke? what you know about eating your cereal with a fork so you got to save the milk for later? You don't know nothing about that. You don't know that. Look, what you know about eating cereal with water because we ain't had no milk. What you know about that? Right? We like to go back and forth, right, with this kind of monopoly of oppression. And I know my mom's probably watching this on the internet. I want to say I appreciate her. We didn't have it all good growing up, but we had milk with our Fruit Loops. And so I want to shout you out, Mama. Thank you. Thank you for the milk. My moms, my pops, thank y'all for that. Because I didn't know people was living like that. So we want somebody, though, who can identify with our pain, right? So we want a leader that can feel our struggle. And even with Jesus, the Bible says, for we do not have a what? A high priest who is unable to empathize with our weakness. But we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Hebrews 4:15. And Joshua was a man that knew what it was like to be in bondage, had experienced freedom inside of bondage, so he could, like Dr. King, like Harriet Tubman and Jesus, identify with the people who was following him and take them to the promise and salvation that had been given them in their name. But just because you're in bondage, just like the poet said earlier, does not mean you saved. Sorry, just because you're out of bondage does not mean you saved. Just because you are out of bondage does not necessarily mean you're free. And that's when we move to the book of Leviticus. Now, Leviticus is all about sanctification. Sanctification is the act or the process of being holy, learning the ways of salvation, learning the ways of freedom. See, God's people have been in bondage. They have been oppressed for about 400 years. And they have been forced to adopt the pagan ways of Egypt, the way they ate, the way they worshiped, the way they dressed, and all these different aspects of Egyptian culture. And the Israelites had to adopt this culture of the oppressor in order to survive, and God understood that. And there was little really that they could do about it because of the ways that their master's lifestyle and culture, the ways that it was so pervasive in their life. It was all they knew. So when God immediately took them out of physical oppression, it didn't necessarily mean that the culture of oppression was out of them. And in scholarship and in academia, we call this internalized oppression. And it's when the victims of oppression began to adopt the ways of the people that have oppressed them, even to the point where they want to look like them. They want to act like them. They want to have the same names as their oppressors and wear the same clothes and even be around them, adopt the same beliefs. And we see this happening with the people of Israel. We see this in God's word when the people of Israel say, take us back to Egypt. We was better off out there. They knew that although they were enslaved, that Pharaoh would give them food, would give them clothes, give them whatever he could give them to keep them working. However, with the God in the wilderness, they didn't know what was going on. They had no idea. Manna coming out the sky. They had the pillar by the day and the cloud by the night or something like that, right? They didn't know what was happening. They didn't know what God was doing. But internalized depression is when you would rather desire the consistency of slavery than the unfamiliarity of freedom. Internalized depression is when you would rather desire the consistency of slavery than the unfamiliarity of freedom. And I'm going to just take a real quick break. I actually saw this at another church. I want to say to some of the older folks, I know that we are not allowed to be on our phones and on our devices and on social media in church, but we do it anyway. We be on there. In fact, the younger the person, probably the more they are on social media and on their devices during church. And so I say, well, you know what? We should probably integrate that into the service, right, in some way. So we're going to have social media breaks throughout this sermon, right? So I'm going to say something, and if you want to take it down, if you want to write it down, tweet it, Facebook it, what's the other one? Instagram, Snapchat, Periscope, the Whip, the Nene, whatever y'all doing. I don't get all of them. I don't know all of them. I stopped at Instagram, so that's where I am, right? But whatever it is that y'all do, go ahead and do that. You can take a picture. I shave, so you can even do that if you need to. But you don't know where God is taking you because it's so complex. So you would rather go back to the simple sustenance inside slavery that Satan provides. That's internalized depression. And so what God had to do was God had to provide a new set of laws, a new set of traditions and practices to not only free his people on the outside, but also to free them on the inside. He had to rid them of the ways and the culture of Egypt and teach them a new and more righteous way of living. And he did that. He provided an entire book that would cleanse them of the unrighteousness that they had to internalize in Egypt. And this book was put in place to instruct this new nation on how to properly serve God. As a matter of fact, the book of Leviticus was probably the first book that a Jewish child would read and have to learn. So before you even understand your Jewish identity, you're understanding how to be like God, how to worship God, how to reflect God. Leviticus teaches you literally how to love God and how to appreciate salvation. And it kind of reminds me of when you're in a relationship with someone. When you're in a relationship with someone, if you're single, typically you can be selfish, right? You can kind of come and go as you please, but once you get in a relationship, you have to think about another person, and that gets difficult from time to time, right? And so there was a book came out years ago called The 5 Love Languages. Have you heard of that book? Five Love Languages. Who wrote it? Gary Chapman, right? And what Gary Chapman does is he takes this idea of love and the way in which we love each other and presents it in 5 frameworks he calls languages, right? And he says that all of us have a language. All of us have a way in which we express love and a way in which we receive love, okay? And so let's take, for example, let's say hypothetically, right? Myself and Sarah, okay? Hypothetically, right? Let's say that my love language is gifts, receiving gifts. And let's say that her love language is quality time, okay? So if we're just now getting together and I say, man, I want to show her that I care, I want to show her that I love her, what am I probably going to do? I'm probably going to give her a gift, right? Because, why? Because that's the way I love. That's the way I receive love. So I'm going to get her a gift. So I'm going to get off work and I'm going to go to JCPenney's and I'm going to say, yeah, I know she wanted that clutch. So I'm going to get her that. Well, actually, I'm going to go to Burlington and see if they got one there, if it looked like the one at JCPenney's. If not, I'm going to go to the one that, right? So I'm going to go to, right, I'm going to pick whichever one is cheaper. And then and then I'm gonna come home and I'm gonna say, hey boo, I got you this purse, girl. And she might respond, oh, thank you, this so nice. Oh, a little kiss on the cheek. That's all I'm getting. Why does she respond like that? Because that ain't her love language. It's mine. And vice versa. She may come to me on a Sunday afternoon and say, hey, I want us to spend some quality time. I want us to get together, go to a park. And I'm like, all right, cool, during halftime or something. Right? Why am I responding like that? It's not my love language. So when you're in a relationship, you got to learn how to speak the other person's language. So if I want to show her I love her, then what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to say, listen, I set aside some time where we can get together, we can share some quality time with each other, and then she's going to be happy. And then in return, the way she shows me she loves me is if I get off work and I come home working 8 hours and I see a pair of Jordans on the bed, man, I'm going to be like, yo, she really cares about me. So that was just a little Christmas plug right there, since we're around the holiday season. That was a little Christmas plug right there. So when we look at the book of Leviticus, we see that Joshua generation again is about the art of producing a people that God saves. I'm not sure what happened here, but we're gonna work it out. So you have to act or behave like a saved person when God is working with you. You have to live like a free person. And God is showing you how to be that and how to love him. In fact, you have to act and behave free before you are actually granted your freedom. You have to be free in your mind and in your actions before you can become free in your body. They were given this sanctification process of freedom before they had actually entered the promised land. God has to be pervasive throughout your mind, your heart, your actions, before he can put you in a position where others can see your freedom. So before you live in the land of milk and honey, the land of milk and honey has to live inside of you. You're already free when you have invited Christ into your life, but once you begin to behave like God, you're already free. The physical land of milk and honey is just to show the rest of the world what you already got. See, God had not taken them into freedom yet. He hadn't given them the land yet. But before you get there, you got to know how to stay there. If he don't teach you how to stay there, you're going to get there and mess it up. And that's what the sanctification process is all about. The actual land of milk and honey is only to show the rest of the world who God is, so that God matches on the outside what he's already done for you on the inside. And so when we look at the book of Leviticus, it's just that. It is the sanctification of liberation. God's rules, regulations, stipulations, and expectations are his way of preparing you for the declaration of his promise. I'm going to say that again. God's rules, regulations, stipulations, and expectations are his way of preparing you for the declaration of his promise. Now, if we continue to read Leviticus, we see that according to scholars, another important component is the system of sacrifice. See, salvation is not a one-time thing. It's not a one-time act. It's an ongoing process. It's an ongoing process, and God created a system that reminded his people that in the Joshua generation, in the art of creating a people that God will save, you're going to mess up sometimes. You're going to act the fool sometimes. And so I have to create something that allows you to get back with me, to stay in touch with me. And what it did was, it was his way of showing them forgiveness through sacrifice. And it was a foreshadowing of the ultimate sacrifice of his son. So the art of preparing people for salvation is showing them what a person who God saves looks like and how to continue to reflect that salvation. So right now, we're right here at the book of Numbers. And in the book of Numbers, we see that there's a wandering of God's people. They start to lose their direction. And in this section, I'm talking to my leaders. Raise your hand if you're a leader in the church, in your community, in your home, anybody. Right. I'm talking to my leaders right here. This is very important. If you will, turn with me to Numbers 13, 27 through 28. Numbers 13, 27 through 28. So now we're getting closer to the promised land, and Joshua and Caleb have been chosen to explore this promised land. And they were there for about 40 days. And when they got there, they came back with the following report. He said, "We came to the land to which you sent us, and it flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there." Now, the descendants of Anak were very tall, big guys, like Yao Ming Shaq kind of brothers, and with real long necks. And when they got there, and when they heard about it, they were discouraged, and they were ready to go back to Egypt. And then Joshua and Caleb said, if you look probably on the same page or on the next page, in Numbers 14, 7 through 9, it says, "The land which we passed through to spy it out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us. A land that flows with milk and honey, only do not rebel against the Lord. And do not fear the people of the land, for they are bread for us. Their protection is removed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them." See, Joshua had direction. He was ready to go into the land. He had the faith, he had the assurance that God was going to take care of his people. But this is when freedom gets hard. Because see, a person that is truly free, a person that is truly saved from bondage, cannot enjoy the fruits of that salvation. They cannot enjoy the life of freedom unless their people can enjoy it as well. Because see, when Moses left Egypt, he left and he lived a good life. He had a wife, he was with his father-in-law, they had money. He had everything. And God told him, "I need you to go back and you got to go get my people, because what's the point of you having this? What's the point of you having freedom? What's the point of you experiencing liberation and your people can't be there with you? What's the point of Harriet Tubman going up to the north when she constantly has to think about her husband or her kids or her family that's still enslaved? What's the point of Dr. King having all this knowledge, having all this wisdom, right, had freed his mind, and he had all kind of job offers after that whole Montgomery bus boycott thing? He had all kind of job offers. I'm talking about from churches in the north and universities and even in Europe. Folks in Europe was like, "You ain't even got to deal with this. You can come over here. You know we're going to treat you right. We appreciate what you're doing." But what would it look like if he was over there and he had to watch the news and see the people that he grew up with suffering, struggling, knowing that he had the methods of freedom to get them out of that situation? If you could do that, you ain't free, you assimilate. And after we sinned, God could have easily destroyed us. He could have easily destroyed us. But he sacrificed. And he came back to get us so that we could enjoy the joys of heaven with him. He wants his people, his children there with him. A person who is truly free cannot enjoy the fruits of freedom unless they have gone back to get the people that they were in bondage with. I'm talking to my leaders. This is real. You can only go as far as your people. Period. And Joshua knew that as a leader. He could only go as far as his people went. The leader may be ready to go into the promised land, but if the people ain't ready, it's your job to do what? To get them ready. There's an African saying that says, "I am because we are, and we are because I am." That means I reflect my people. My people reflect me, and I reflect my people. I am a reflection of my people. Joshua was ready to go in the forward direction, but his people was not. So it was his job to go back and get them. He had to lead them, not by being ahead of them, telling them you better catch up, or not being behind them, pushing them, but he walked with the people into the promised land. And this was hard, because in the book of Numbers is where we see Israel messing up big time, right? They telling their leader, "Listen, we don't want to be here. You see the picture. These guys is huge, right? We'd rather go back to Egypt." Moses messing up because God done told him to speak to the rock. He decides, "I'm going to hit the rock." So God was like, "Well, you know I can't let you in now," right? So everybody messing up, right? Everybody messing up. And through this direction, through this wandering process, through this wilderness process, sometimes in the process of salvation, we're going to lose our way. And there's going to be times where we're not quite sure where we're supposed to go. And I want you to see this right here. Can everybody see that? Yeah. Right. So I saw this meme. I thought it was so powerful. It says success, what people thinks it looks like over on this side, but what it really looks like over on the other side. And if you ask just about anybody who is successful, even right here, actually, let me change that. If you ask anybody who worked for their success, because you got some people who got things, right, that was just handed to them, right? So anybody who's worked for a certain level of success, they will tell you that in order to get to a level of success, it's a lot of twists, it's a lot of turns and stop and goes. You here and there's you a lot of times you're not sure where you want to go. And I think President Obama his life is probably the biggest example of that. If you read his book, Dreams from My Father and Audacity of Hope, you will see that his road to what we see now was a struggle, right? There is no real clear and distinct path to success. So if we look at President Obama was born to, he had a pretty good childhood. He was in the 60s, but he was in Hawaii when all that stuff was going down. So he's seeing it on television like, man, that's messed up. But he was half white. His mama was white. His grandparents was white. He lived, if you ain't ever been to Hawaii, it's beautiful, right? Crime rate is like super low down there. Because what you want to kill somebody you got beaches like that for? Like, right? You just go to the beach and y'all chill out. So he had a good life, right? Went to college, went to Occidental College, and then later on went to Columbia. So right now, it's looking like, it's on the other side. It's looking like that's the path to success, right? He's looking real good. And then after he graduates from Columbia, and he had a few pretty good jobs for about a year or so, he calls his mama and he calls his grandparents and say, so guess what I'm thinking about doing? They say, what? I'm thinking about becoming a community organizer. You could have did that without the loans and the degree. Why you doing that? Right? Yeah, I'm thinking, I think I want to be a community organizer, and I think I want to move to Chicago on the south side. Why? Wait a minute, what decade is this? So you want to leave Columbia, leave New York, move to the south side of Chicago in the 1980s in the middle of the crack epidemic? Boy, what is wrong with you? I'm talking about what success really looks like, right? So it's looking like he's not really making the right decisions right now, but he stays there for 3 years and he understands and he begins to develop his skills as a community organizer, right? And then later on, he applies to Harvard Law School. He gets into Harvard Law School, right? So now it's looking like it's going up again. He gets into Harvard Law. He becomes the first African-American to head the Harvard, to be the editor of the Harvard Law Review, right? He graduates from Harvard Law. He marries Michelle Obama, and he becomes a professor, right, at the University of Chicago. He starts to get into politics. Things is looking real good for him. And then around the late 90s, he runs a race, and he loses real bad, right? And if you are a politician, you know that a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of effort and people are dependent on you when you run in these races, right? And he lost. It was a hard defeat for him. Right after he lost, there was a Democratic National Convention in LA, right? So he got on, now he had no money, he was broke, and he will tell you in his book, Audacity of Hope, things was real rough for him and Michelle around this time. Michelle was actually getting ready to leave him because he was on the road so much. He was on the road like 200 and something days out the year. So she already felt like a single mother. So he tells you in the book she was on her way out, right? Holly ain't got no money, gets on a plane, travels down to LA. He has a balance on his credit card. He tries to go to rent a car. They wouldn't let him rent the car because he had a balance on his credit card. Now, y'all know President Obama real smooth. So he talked his way, right, into letting, to the clerk, and the clerk allowed him to get a car. He got the car. He drove to where the convention was being held, and they wouldn't let him in. They wouldn't let him in the convention, all right? Even though he was a part of the Democratic Party, because they were mad that he lost that election. They didn't want him to run in Chicago, and they were mad, and so they started to separate themselves from him, right? So he had to stand outside and watch the convention on the outside. This is around the year 2000. So he had to watch the convention outside and get back on a plane and go back to Chicago. But I'm talking about the real path to success, because what that Democratic Party didn't know was that 4 years later, that same brother that they dissed would be now the keynote speaker of the Democratic National Convention in 2004. I'm talking about the same brother that they distanced themselves from. About 5 years later after that, they would now have to lift and celebrate as the 44th president of the United States of America. I'm talking about what success really looks like. I'm talking to my young people. Success is not easy. It ain't gonna look like this. You may think you got there, and then it's gonna be some twists, it's gonna be some turns, it's gonna be some things in your way, it's gonna be some barriers, but sometimes you got to stay in that wilderness. Sometimes God has you in that wilderness for a purpose. He's trying to develop some things inside of your character. And so he has you in that wilderness. He has you wandering for a reason. Stay on the path. Stay in that wilderness. Stay on that path. He has you there for a purpose. Stay there. Don't get mad. Don't go back to what you used to do. Don't go back to bondage. Don't go back to oppression. Stay on that path towards freedom. Stay on that path towards salvation. God has you there for a reason. Whatever it is that he has given you, whatever it is that is inside of you, that every time you wake up, that's the first thing you think about. Follow that. He put that in you for a reason. Your mama may not understand it. Your daddy may not understand it. It's all right. Follow that path. And I promise you, if you stay on the path that God has for you, you will see the fruits of it in the end. And so what we see right here is we see right after that, and going into the book of Deuteronomy, we see that in this Joshua generation process, or in the process of preparing a generation of people that God will save, we also have to be reminded of God's instruction. We have to be reminded of his instruction. Because see, when God first gave the instructions to the people of Israel, which generation was this? This was the generation that had just come out of Egypt, right? Now, this was a brand new generation because they had messed up. God said, well, you know what? You can't make it into the promised land. So now there was a new generation that's coming up. But with this new covenant, with this new generation, God has to create a new covenant for them. And what this lets me know, and one of the last and most important aspects of the salvation process, is that you have to know God for yourself, young people. You can't depend on the covenant that your mama made with God. You can't depend on the covenant that your father made with God. You have to understand God for yourself. You cannot depend on the relationship that your grandparents or that your great-grandparents or your great-great-grandparents had with God. You have to understand him for yourself. You have to create a relationship with him for yourself. And I am a fervent believer, right, and I got this from another one of my colleagues, that we stand on the shoulders of giants. I believe that. I believe that I'm here because some old woman who was enslaved probably in Florida somewhere or in Georgia prayed that I would be here. Or some old man sharecropping in some fields back in Louisiana somewhere prayed that I would be here. So I believe in that. But at the end of the day, Pastor Whitaker, at the end of the day, you have to go to God for yourself. You have to understand him for yourself. You have to create a relationship and a covenant with him for yourself, because when you finally do get to the pearly gates, it's not going to be about what your mama said. It's not going to be about what your daddy said or what kind of belief or what kind of situation that they had with God. It's going to be about you and him. And so once you have reconnected with him, once you and him have an understanding and you have a relationship that sometimes other people may not understand, then that's when you're ready to possess the land. That's when you're ready for freedom. That's when you're ready for liberation. That's when you're ready for what it is that God has been preparing you for. But as I was going through this, I began to think about, number one, the age range of Joshua around this time. So historians say that Joshua spent about 20 years in slavery. And how long were they in the wilderness? They was in the wilderness for about 40 years. So that makes Joshua how old when he gets to the promised land? He about 60. Now, to some of us, that may seem old, but he wouldn't be able to get Social Security if he was living now, right? He wouldn't get those benefits. So it really just depends. But what we see is that Joshua's generation is not necessarily about an age cohort. It doesn't always have to do with your age, although, yes, him and Caleb were the two oldest people who went into the promised land, right? But everybody else, that means, was probably in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. But regardless, this salvation process is not necessarily just about age. And I started to think about, well, in between the time that he saw the land for the first time and he finally possessed the land, what kept Joshua going? Because like others, Joshua may have said, man, these young kids, they wasn't there when Pharaoh was oppressing us. What they know about going through some hardships, what they know about possessing the land. They don't know nothing about making bricks without no straw. How in the world will they be ready for salvation and ready for liberation? Sometimes when I'm giving presentations or teaching somewhere, or I'm on somebody's radio station and people call in, sometimes folks will ask me, they'll say, well, where do you see the next generation going? Because it seems like us older folks who marched in the 60s and we fought in the 70s, these kids don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate it. All they care about is the gold, and they care about the chains and the money and living a fancy lifestyle. They're just squandering away all of our hard work. And this is my response to them. First of all, every single person over the age of 50 or 60 did not march with Dr. King. So let's stop the madness right there. Let's stop it right there. Because I seen the numbers. I know I said I seen, it was I saw, but I said it that way. I seen the numbers. When Dr. King was alive, only 51% of black people actually supported his cause. And only 49% of white folks actually supported his cause. This was before, of course, they done made the holiday, and now they got all these Martin Luther King Boulevards. Before all of that, before he became mainstream, and people began to dilute his message, right? It wasn't that many people that was rocking with him. So it's time out for an entire generation of people to take credit for something only half of y'all was even a part of. But let's just say, for example, let's say the entire baby boomers generation was a part of the civil rights movement. What makes you think that the young people of today are not continuing that struggle towards liberation in their own way? In research, everything that we do, right, Clint, everything that we do, we have to back it up with claim, right? It has to have some kind of evidence behind it. What's your evidence for saying that these young people are not continuing that struggle towards liberation? Is it the TV? Because although I'm not a part of that generation, I've studied it, and I know that it was somebody from your generation that said the revolution would not be televised. So if all you're doing is watching CNN and ABC and Fox News, even the president knows Fox News is racist. If all you're doing is watching TV and you sitting there and you changing the channel and you seeing thug and gangster and criminal and thug and gangster and woman shaking her behind, if that's all you seeing, there's a reason why. It's because that's what they want you to see. They're doing their job. They're doing exactly what they set out to do. If this was the 1600s or 1700s, they'll probably be sending negative images and smoke signals somewhere about us. They're doing exactly what they set out to do. So if you believe in this false narrative about your young people, they ain't the problem. You the one I'm concerned about. You know society is out to get our young people. Why would you believe everything that the TV is telling you about them, that society is telling you about them? So when people ask me why are these young people not continuing the fight that they started and why are they not continuing this struggle for freedom and for liberation, I say, are you plugged into the networks that these young people are plugged into? Are you on Facebook? Are you on Twitter? Are you on Instagram or YouTube? Are you talking to them? Better yet, are you out there? Are you out there? Because I was out there when tens to hundreds of young people shut down 75, 85 in Atlanta for hours to ensure that their voices were heard when it came to police misconduct right here in Atlanta in black neighborhoods. Did you see those young people? Did you see them march towards the Florida State Capitol? Right around the time of the Trayvon Martin, right after that time that Zimmerman was let go, and they marched to the state capitol and would not let them work until they repealed the Stand Your Ground law. Were you there? Were you there when millions of them marched in New York to protest the injustice surrounding Eric Garner's murder? Were you there? Did you see it? What about the University of Missouri football team? Not just the football team, but the entire student body protested until their president, who was not responding to the issues of race and racism on their campus, was fired. Not fired, but he eventually resigned. We know what that means. We know what that means. What about the thousands, if not millions, of young people who responded to the call of Minister Louis Farrakhan about justice or else? Did you see it? Probably not, because it really wasn't covered on any major TV stations extensively, right? You probably didn't hear about it either, because many of our Adventist churches were silent about it. Many times our churches are silent about issues that are important to our young people, and they are dying at the hands of injustice out here, and we're silent. We're silent about it. You ain't got to agree with Minister Louis Farrakhan theologically, but it's about 10 to 50,000 members of the Nation of Islam, and they have led millions against the fight against injustice. It's 18 million Seventh-day Adventists in this world. 18 million, and I ain't seen nothing more than a letter come from the country or the world church speaking on the brutalization of black people here in America. And even when the injustice hits home, I mean, with 18 million, we can have our own Million Man March. We ain't got to ask nobody else. And all I see is a letter. If I'm missing something, you let me know. And even when the injustice hits home, around the time that that monster had killed 9 people in South Carolina in that church, Steve, 9 people in South Carolina in that church, that next week, several black churches around the South were burned down, including an Adventist church. And we were silent about it. Where was our church then? Did our church not make a loud outcry about that? And I ain't talking about just praying during intercessory prayer. That's good. I ain't got no problem with that. But there has to be something more. There has to be some kind of social change, some kind of action. You got 18 million people who say they follow a God who is a God of justice. Where is that support when Ray Ray, right out here on Candler Road, is being hemmed up by the police in front of his wife, or in front of his mother, or in front of his kids? Where is that connection to the God of justice when Sandra Bland committed suicide in a jail cell? Where is that connection to the God of justice when Corey Jones, a church drummer, we love our church drummers, they love y'all, right? Don't they, Press? They love the musicians. He was killed by an undercover police, not an undercover, he was an off-duty police officer. Where is that connection to the God of justice? I know it ain't on the couch screaming all lives matter. I know it can't be doing that. Not when more black men are being killed by the police than any other race or demographic. I know it ain't screaming all lives matter. When most of our black men are in prison for nonviolent drug offenses. I know you ain't screaming all lives matter. Not when, as I'm talking right now, the incarceration of our black women are increasing. Right now. I know we're not screaming all lives matter. And when these tragic events happen in our communities, I used to come to church to get answers. Like most young people, I used to come to church to get answers. But for a while now, I stopped. I stopped coming to church on those weekends when those events would happen, because most of the time, if we want to speak about an age cohort, most of the time the Moses generation wasn't talking about it. They wouldn't even discuss it. They wouldn't even speak about it. It was the same theology, the same thing over and over again. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's uncomfortable. But if you go into church every single week and you comfortable every single week, then you in the wrong church. Because to grow is to go through pain. Your convictions must be challenged. And your faith must be tested by the very church that says it is the remnant. You must be uncomfortable. Answers not only to your theological questions, but your social questions and your political questions must be found in the church. If they're not, the young people are going to go somewhere else. Well, we talk about it on Wednesday night, and we talk about it at AY, but the young people, they don't never come back. They talk about it when they're here. Because it's not about time. It's about the message. It's about lives being changed. But we can't really talk about it during divine worship hour. Why not? Because young people out here dying during divine worship. They out here getting falsely imprisoned during divine worship. Why can't we not talk about it during divine worship? When our church becomes silent about issues that matter, then we become contributors to our own demise. You can tweet that. When our church becomes silent about issues that matter, we begin to contribute to our own demise. I got 3 points and I'm going to let you go. Our church has got to be in tune with the issues and problems that this generation is facing. We have to. You cannot wait for other people to tell you what your young people are doing. Get connected with them. Talk to them, get around them, connect yourself with them, with their world. Well, they don't want to be around us. We'll find another way. If you're going to properly assess their behaviors, then you got to get around them and see what they're doing and not what the media is telling you that they're doing. And last but not least, if black lives don't matter to the church, then they won't matter to the world. And you're going to lose them both physically and spiritually. If the lives of our young people don't matter to us, they're not going to matter to them. See, Joshua wasn't necessarily a part of the generation that went into the promised land, but he was in tune with them. He walked with them. He marched with them. He worshiped with them. He laughed with them. So when it was time to lead them, he was effective in bringing them into salvation and bringing them into liberation. But it started with a calling. It started with a purpose. Him understanding his calling and him understanding the Joshua generation process that was happening in his life. Earlier we talked about Ephraim and how Ephraim means being fruitful in the land of misfortunes, and how Tupac's rose that grew from concrete is an example of that. But we are a product of another rose that grew from concrete. Because my Bible says that when speaking about my Savior, what good can come out of Nazareth? Nazareth was a kind of concrete. Jesus' childhood was concrete. But God chose to put his son in a lifeless situation. A mother who wasn't married. He was raised on the run because the king was trying to kill him. Jesus was put in a lifeless situation, and through that concrete brought us life, brought us salvation, and started this salvation and this Joshua generation process for us. If you're willing to accept that process and walk in the liberation that God has laid out for us, God has laid out for you in your personal life, and begin to apply that process in a tangible way for our young people, then I want you to stand with me right now. I want you to stand with me right now. Because it's time for our church to be involved in what's going on out in the world. It's time for it. We are on the brink of another movement. It's happening right now. And the social and political climate of our country is shaking up. And if we want our young people to understand what is happening from a Christian standpoint, if we do, then we have to be prepared to talk about it. We have to be prepared to deal with it. If we don't, we're going to lose them. We don't want to lose our young people. We don't want to lose our young adults. We want to provide them with the perspective necessary to navigate through these tumultuous times. If you're willing to unite our church, if you're willing to stand behind our young people as we move forward, not only as a church, but as a community and as a society, then I want you to pray with me right now. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for these words. We thank you for opening our minds, for opening our hearts. God, be with us right now. I know we're afraid. I know it's uncomfortable. I know sometimes we get comfortable. We like being here. We like being in our little bubble. We like staying in our little church, living in our middle class neighborhoods and suburban neighborhoods and having potluck and then going home and starting another week. I know it's comfortable, God, but things are rough out there. It's rough out there. And our people, our young people, are right in the middle of it. They one hashtag away from being 6 feet under. God, we got to deal with this thing. And we can't be afraid to do it. So God, I ask you to give us the strength. I ask you to give us the vision to move our church forward, to connect our churches and our community in a way like never before. We benefit from the sacrifices of the civil rights movement. We benefit from the sacrifices of people who did just that. And then in the same breath, we move away from it. We move away from it, God. So be with us. Joshua 1:9 talks about courage, God. And you have given us that courage to conquer. You've given us that courage to possess the land. It doesn't matter how big those giants are. It doesn't matter how big Enoch is. It doesn't matter how big the descendants of Enoch are. You've given us everything that we need to possess the land. Help us move forward, God. Help us to reach freedom. Help us to reach salvation, God. And once we do, we will be careful to give you all the praise and all the honor and all the glory. In your holy name we pray. Amen.